The sun was just beginning to rise over the dense Alaskan forest, casting a golden hue over the mist that clung stubbornly to the treetops. In a tiny, secluded cabin nestled between the pine trees lived Ethan Cole, a reclusive wildlife rehabilitator who had once been a prominent veterinarian in New York City. After a tragedy that cost him his wife and daughter in a car crash 6 years ago, Ethan had turned away from people and toward animals. They didn't lie. They didn't leave. They simply were. Ethan had dedicated the last few years of his life to rescuing injured wildlife. Bears, foxes, wolves, even the occasional moose. He had nursed them all back to health. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened one bitterly cold November morning. It started with an eerie sound, a low, mournful howl unlike anything he'd heard before. Ethan stepped out of his cabin, a hot mug of coffee in hand, and froze. A massive grizzly bear was standing just yards away from his porch. His first instinct was to back into the cabin. A grizzly so close meant danger. But then he saw her eyes. There was no rage in them. No hunger. Only pain. Sorrow. And, was it pleading? The bear made a low, guttural whimper and stepped aside. Behind her, a tiny cub lay sprawled on the frozen ground, barely breathing. Its sides heaved unevenly. Blood stained its fur. One paw was twisted at an unnatural angle. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He had never seen anything like this. Was she asking him to help? Slowly, cautiously, Ethan walked toward the cub. The mother bear didn't move. Didn't growl, didn't charge. Her massive frame trembled, her eyes never leaving him. He knelt by the cub, gently placing a hand on its side. It was alive, but just barely. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, possible infection. Needed help. Rest. Ethan looked at the mother. "You want me to save your baby?" She gave a soft, rumbling grunt, her massive head bowing for a moment. Felt like a yes. With every ounce of caution, Ethan scooped the tiny creature into a thick blanket and carried it into his cabin. The mother followed, stopping at the doorway but not entering. She sat like a statue, her massive body just outside, eyes fixed on the door, unmoving, waiting. Inside, Ethan worked like a man possessed. He cleaned the wounds, set the broken leg, administered antibiotics, and even performed a makeshift surgery on a ruptured spleen. Hours passed. His hands were stained with blood. His eyes burned with fatigue. But he didn't stop. The cub's breathing began to even out. The bleeding slowed. Hope flickered. As night fell, Ethan stepped outside, exhausted and shivering. The mother bear was still there, unmoved, her body dusted with snow. "He's alive," Ethan whispered. And then the impossible happened. The bear bowed. Not just dipped her head. She bowed, lowering her chest to the ground in what could only be described as reverence or gratitude. Ethan had seen wolves submit, dogs express love, but this was different, deeper. In that moment, something ancient and unspoken passed between them, a sacred trust. Over the next several days, the mother bear remained near the cabin, circling the perimeter but never straying far. Ethan continued to care for the cub, who he began to call Sprig, for the tiny green sprig of fur Ethan had tucked into his bandage. Sprig slowly began to recover, first opening his eyes, then nibbling on soft berries, then attempting to stand. On the 5th night, Ethan was jolted awake by a thud outside. He ran out to find the mother pacing frantically, growling softly at the darkness. Something was wrong. Then came the sound, a loud mechanical rumble. Snowmobiles. Hunters. Poaching was illegal in these parts, but laws were hard to enforce this deep into the wilderness. Ethan had heard rumors, men with tranquilizer guns capturing wild animals to sell illegally. He grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the sound. What he found made his blood run cold. 3 men stood near the edge of the woods, dressed in camouflage, their snowmobiles still humming. One of them held a tranquilizer rifle. Another was dragging a crude metal cage behind him. They had come for the bear. "She's been hanging around for days," one of the men said. Perfect specimen. Worth thousands. You need to leave, Ethan shouted, stepping between them and the direction of his cabin. The man with the rifle laughed. Old man, you don't own this forest. No, Ethan replied, heart pounding. But I'll die before I let you take her. It was 3 against 1, no contest. But just as the man raised the rifle, a massive shadow moved behind them. A bear. With a roar that shook the trees, she charged. The hunters panicked. One dropped the rifle. Another tripped over the cage and scrambled backward. They bolted, diving onto their snowmobiles and speeding away into the trees. The bear didn't follow. She simply turned and looked at Ethan. He nodded. Thank you. The next morning, Sprigg stood on his own for the first time. When Ethan opened the cabin door, the cub limped toward his mother, who lowered her head and nuzzled him gently. There was a softness in her eyes Ethan had never seen before. Pure, maternal relief. The moment had come. With his heart heavy and proud, Ethan watched as the bear and her cub slowly disappeared into the forest. But that wasn't the end. Over the following months, Ethan returned to his quiet life, though something inside him had changed. He began writing again, publishing a book titled The Day a Bear Cried. It became a bestseller. People around the world were touched by the story of trust, instinct, and a mother's love that transcended species. Ethan used the book's earnings to expand his cabin into a full wildlife rescue center. Volunteers came. Donations poured in. But perhaps the most incredible part. Every spring, just after the snow melted, a massive grizzly bear would appear at the edge of the woods. With her, a now fully grown cub. They would stay for a day, sometimes 2, watching from afar, silent, proud. And every year, as Ethan stood on his porch and watched them, he whispered, "Thank you for trusting me."